Hey Anthony,
Yes, Philip?
did you know that politics play a major role in the climate change fight?
Yes, I did know that.
Well, let's talk about it.
Can we just talk? Can we just talk? Talk about where we're going.
Politics is an inevitable subject when talking about climate change, because they are directly intertwined. In this episode, we'll address the political implications of climate change over the years, what governments are doing, and afterwards we'll tackle the effects of climate change on developing countries.
Now, we mentioned in an earlier episode that climate change has interested the scientific community since the 70s. However, the first global conference about climate change was held in February 1979 at the World Climate Conference in Geneva. In 1988, the UN held a panel on climate change where the UN Environmental Programme and World Meteorological Organization established the IPCC, which stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The goal was to propose a global response by using scientific data, and that response came on December 1997 with the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol. It stated that 37 industrialized nations, like the United States, should reduce their greenhouse gases emissions since the burden fell on developed countries. However, 1 year later, in 1998, many obstacles opposing the Kyoto Protocol appeared. From the ExxonMobil company, a juggernaut in the oil industry, stating it would weaken the economy to change practices, and the Oregon Petition, a document that was made solely to prove that climate change was not man-made. And sadly, in 2001, George W. Bush withdrew the US from the Kyoto Protocol. Canada followed shortly after. Despite that, on February 16, 2005, the protocol took effect, but without the implication of the most polluting countries like the US and Russia. Luckily, people decided to step up. For example, the ExxonMobil company's new CEO conceded that greenhouse gases are indeed a major driver of climate change. Furthermore, in 2008, that same company decided to stop funding groups that shed negative light on climate change science.
We came a long way since the Kyoto Protocol in terms of political implications, with, for example, the Paris Accord in 2015, which brought hope to many people, including me. This accord was signed by 195 countries, and its goal was to reduce the global gas emissions to keep global temperatures rise well below the 2 degrees Celsius mark. It was put in effect on November 4th, 2016. In 2017, the only countries that had not signed were Nicaragua, Syria, and the United States, since Donald Trump decided to remove the US from the accord when he became president. Thankfully, President Joe Biden rejoined right away, putting the US back in the mix starting in 2021. Even though the political implications increased over the years, climate change shows no sign of slowing down. The problem is, we have the goals, but no progress. Despite some countries like China, France, Portugal, and Sweden making positive strides in reducing their carbon footprint, the carbon emissions increased by 1.6% in 2017 and 2.7% in 2018. We're going backwards. It should be going down, not up. So what is going on with the Paris Accord?
Well, National Geographic states that most countries aren't hitting the goals for 2030. So, in short, the 2 degrees Celsius goal will most likely not be achieved. Sir Robert Watson, former chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, states, open quotes, countries need to double and triple their 2030 reduction commitments to be aligned with the Paris target. We have the technology and knowledge to make those emission cuts, but what's missing are strong enough policies and regulations to make it happen. End quotes. Some countries like Morocco, India, and the European Union are improving. Others put the economic expansion first. For example, Saudi Arabia's pledge is weaker than the one made in 2013. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, is against using green energy. Turkey has not ratified the Paris Accord. And of course, we have America, that was going completely backwards. Trump's administrations tried to censor climate science, questioning the validity of the Paris Accord, and promoted coal and not so environmentally friendly practices. Trump's chief administrator stated, open quotes, the demonization of carbon dioxide is just like the demonization of the poor Jews under Hitler. End quotes.
Yeah, that is very wrong for so many reasons.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you.
This shows exactly why better education is incredibly important. More of the population needs to know about climate change and its implications to avoid being manipulated by completely false claims and statements like this one. Change will come only if people know and understand climate change. As UNESCO puts it, open quotes, education is an essential element of the global response to climate change. It helps people understand and address the impact of global warming, increases climate literacy among young people, encourages changes in their attitudes and behavior, and helps them adapt to climate change related trends. Education and awareness raising enable informed decision making, play an essential role in increasing adaptation and mitigation capacities of communities, and empower women and men to adopt sustainable lifestyles. End quotes.
Very important aspect you're putting on the table, Philip. I truly believe climate change education is a key element in the development of a sustainable society. Like we addressed in our episode on the ecological footprint, we have very limited resources on our planet, and people need to know how to use them in a sustainable way. Everyone needs to understand their impacts on the environment and how to decrease these impacts.
Yeah, exactly. Like we said many times, it is vital for our survival that we educate and that we learn. A very important point to mention is that developed countries ignoring climate change and not taking action for economic reasons have dramatic effects on developing countries, simply because intensified global warming primarily impacts poor countries, since they have a higher exposure, a higher sensitivity, and a lower adaptive capacity. This is because most developing countries are in the subtropics, where natural climate variability is higher, and because they don't have the economy, infrastructures, technologies, or knowledge needed to adapt to a varying climate. Their increased exposure to impacts of climate change comes from the alteration of the Earth's hydrological cycle. With higher global temperatures, the global precipitation is increased and its pattern is altered. The result: increased rainfalls in the northern hemisphere and increased rainfall around the subtropical regions where many developing countries are. It's important to note, however, that even though they will receive less rain, the number of heavy rainfall events will increase, thus causing more floods. Furthermore, the gap between rainfalls will increase, prolonging the periods without precipitation, resulting in more frequent and more severe droughts.
So, if I understand correctly, developing countries are more vulnerable because not only do they have a much lower adaptive capacity, but they're also much more exposed to climate driven catastrophes. That's incredibly unfair.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well. What's alarming is that their situation will most likely worsen as climate change intensifies. With a more unstable climate, like it was explained earlier, their economic growth will slow down, their adaptive capacity will decrease, and their vulnerability will increase. It's a very vicious cycle.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, they're also much more vulnerable to current and emerging infectious diseases since they have a reduced resistance to sickness, and they don't always have healthcare nor modern medicine to combat those diseases.
And on top of that, climate change will make achieving the Millennium Development Goals, also known as MDGs, much harder, which exacerbates the developing countries and climate change vicious cycle.
Oh, how come? Could you develop on that matter?
Well, first off, the Millennium Development Goals represents 8 international development goals aiming towards improving the global life quality and reducing poverty in half by 2015. They were set at the United Nations Millennium Summit in 2000, and they are: eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV and AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, develop a global partnership for development and promote gender equality and empower women. However, many studies claim climate change will make it harder to achieve these goals. The first goal, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, is impacted by reduced economic growth from climate change. The second goal, achieving universal primary education, is indirectly affected by climate change. With increased natural catastrophes, countries will spend more resources, efforts, and time towards disasters, thus diminishing the funds available for education. The fourth goal, reducing child mortality, Well, with reduced economic growth and increased poverty, security is negatively impacted, and since health is directly related to one's diet, it leads to a higher child mortality rate. The fifth goal, improving maternal health, is impacted in a similar way. A lower food and water security caused by climate change negatively impacts the condition of pregnant women. Also, emerging infectious diseases, which are intensified by climate change, gravely affect pregnant women. The sixth goal, which is combating HIV and AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, will be negatively impacted by an increase and expansion of infectious diseases. The seventh goal, ensuring environmental sustainability, is made harder because of reduced quality and quantity of drinking water.
Very interesting points that you brought up. Here lies a very important ethical question. What is the developed country's duty towards helping the developing countries in a climate change context? It's a very important question that each and every one of us should think about. What is your take on it, Philip?
Well, I think that helping the developing countries is the developed countries' duty. We have the resources and the knowledge, and like the great Voltaire once said, with great power comes great responsibility, especially considering the fact that developed countries are responsible for 79% of historical carbon emissions. I see nothing but positivity as it will lessen hardships for already poor and suffering people. What I think would also be interesting is if developed countries not only help developing countries adapt to climate change, but also actively help them develop. Not only would it increase the quality of life of billions, but it would also reduce global CO2 emissions. How? Well, developing countries, in order to accelerate their economic growth, don't always use environmentally friendly practices. Cheap and easy energy sources such as coal are often employed instead of renewables such as solar, wind, and hydroelectricity. And that consequently results in a much greater greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, they are responsible for 63% of global carbon emissions. If developed countries help accelerate their economic growth, they wouldn't need to resort to cheap and easy energy sources and practices as much, or at all. Yes, it would come at the cost of rich people, but such is the price of humanity, and at the end, we all come out winning, simply because there is less pollution, and pollution is, after all, a global problem.
Yeah, I share the same view. Helping those in need and sharing is part of my values. They're very important to me, and so I find helping developing countries only natural.
And what's great is that this opinion is widespread enough so that leaders such as Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden lend a helping hand to developing countries. Now, answering this question and other climate-related ethical questions, or any ethical questions really, is only the first step. It's very important to share your thoughts with family and friends and to, well, simply talk about it.
Also, if you feel like the world should change for the better, incite others to join you. Like we said, climate change and politics are directly intertwined. The best way to make change is to implicate yourself in your community and society by promoting an ecological ideology and lifestyle. We need to voice our concern to the politicians who possess the necessary tools to not only better our country's environmental practices, but also help the lives of developing countries' populations. We need to show them that global warming is a serious threat to humanity, and the only way to do that is to vote.
Well, I think it's one of, if not the best method to promote change. We live in a democratic society where we have the privilege to choose who we want as Prime Minister. There lies an enormous power, so let's use that power. Let's fight for a new world, a decent world. A world without barriers, where everyone is open-hearted, hands held high towards the future and towards those in need. A world where no one has to suffer from our mistakes, from our negligence, and from our self-centeredness, including other animals.
Over the course of the incredible journey that was our podcast, we've learned a lot. Hopefully, you did as well. and hopefully, it has inspired change. Now, before this journey reaches its end, here's a message of hope. Because even though the climate change hurdle seems too big to overcome at times, even though facts about climate change seem crushing, we have to keep our hope alive. Otherwise, failure is the only outcome possible. As Samuel Smiles once said, hope is the companion of power and mother of success, for whoso hopes strongly has within him the gift of miracles. Over the course of history, humanity has shown great unity in times of hardship. The COVID-19 pandemic is a great example. We also have proven ourselves capable of the impossible countless times. We conquered the skies, we walked on the moon, we sent robots on Mars. Clearly, when working together, we can achieve greatness. The same applies to climate change. We will get through it if we work together. If we put aside our differences, our nationalities, our beliefs, and face this common enemy as one. Thank you for listening. Anthony and Philip signing off for the last time.